museum established in 1983, and they started this museum for the purpose of having the folk, Greek art, and then the contemporary arts. And in 2015, they decided to have an artist in residence. And the first artist in residence was Eveline Kolijn, and then in 2016 May, Alison Glenn was the second artist in residence, which I was really happy that she asked me to be the production artist with her, working with her at the museum. So I stayed in the museum for 15 days, which I had the experience of working with the collection and meeting the staff and working alongside with the Alison as a professional artist to make the works and being at the residency. Unfortunately, she's ill today, and yeah, I just want to thank the Museum of Antiquities, Interdisciplinary Center of Culture and Creativity for giving us this funding to make this project happen, and also Marcus Miller, Gordon's Temple Gallery, that gave us this opportunity to make this showing here. And yeah, I would like to invite David.
I'm not Alison, but I'm David. I'm Alison's husband, and she's just wanted to say hi to everyone and thank you for coming here. And she's sorry she can't be here tonight. She came hill on Wednesday with bad vertigo, so she's been in bed since then with like really bad balance issue, and so she's here in thoughts, and yeah, she's sorry she can't be here tonight. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, if you have any questions about the museum or the residency, I'm really happy to answer all the questions. But yeah, and I would like to invite Eveline Kolijn here, the first artist in residence at the Boris Museum. And yeah, please welcome Eveline.
So I guess good evening, everyone, and I'm really happy to be here. So I guess I will expand a little bit what I'm going to say without becoming boring. But so I will just briefly give a little introduction on my art and my background. Then I will explain how this residency came to be and the connection between Greece and Canada that has been established in this museum. Of course, then the art I made, and I had a very brief phone conversation with Alison, so I can also say very little bit about what she actually intended to work on after the residency, because I asked her that question today. I was looking forward to meeting her and exchange experiences, but so I will try and do the honors. Let's see, the right button is forward.
Right.
Yeah. So, as you can hear, my accent, I am Dutch of origin. I didn't grow up in the Netherlands. I grew up in the Dutch Caribbean, and that really influenced the art I make. I did a lot of diving and scuba diving, so although I live in Alberta now, the ocean is a big factor in my work, and I wanted to become a marine biologist. I'm very, very interested in subject matter of evolution, microorganisms, and I'm a printmaker, and I really like to reference this connection that exists between natural history in printed illustrations and printmaking, and the exchange of information and art and science. So that has led that interest to actually connecting with actual microbiologists and biologists who found my work, and I sort of had some of my work published on scientific journals. And when you are involved with nature, and I really am very much into the idea of the biosphere, the connectedness of nature, you inevitably nowadays bump into environmental issues and the problem with what's happening to our environment. So this is a non-printed piece of work where I established an iconography to sort of raise all sorts of environmental topics by carving into styrofoam. I also sort of use the images of the styrofoam into my prints. So yes, environment. And one of these things led me to also question my materials I use, you know, in printmaking. They're pretty toxic, and the amount of paper we use. So I teamed up with paper artists in Calgary. I live actually in Calgary now. I'm a practicing artist in Calgary. And we decided we wanted to make papers from locally collected fibers, 100%. We got a grant for that, so there's the Banff Center in National Park, and we spent 2 weeks to process all the fibers we collected in the spring and the summer to make all these papers. And that project was called Paper Landscape. It was really beautiful, the different colors and textures we got out of all these different Alberta fibers. And it was this piece of work that connected me to Greece. About that time, I met with a Greek-Canadian curator who lives in Calgary and in part-time in Athens. And she was in talks with the Canadian embassy in Greece to organize an exhibition. It was a sort of 70th anniversary of Greek-Canadian relationships. And so she curated an exhibition called Women Artists in the Canadian Landscape. And my paper project was part of this exhibition. And the venue they organized in Greece was the Vores Museum. And actually, here, the museum, the exhibition was opened with Mr. Vores, who founded the museum. It's a private museum, and the former Governor General. And that event, the museum was created at the Canada House in Athens. Here is the piece that was up. So those are the papers. There were some more elements, and I also created a small installation of carved, stripped bark and pulp prints from those papers. And the museum is really, really beautiful. Mr. Vores was studied at Queen's and spent 20 years in Canada. And he ran the business for his dad, which he sold, and that made him somewhat of a millionaire. And he decided to use his fortune to acquire art. So he started collecting art in the 60s. When he returned to Greece, Greece was really changing rapidly in the 60s, so lots of old buildings were torn down, and so he started to collect folk art and elements from facades, neoclassical and real classical old stuff, things from villages, olive presses, and you name it. And then he wanted to house his collection. And he bought a small farmhouse estate in a tiny town not that far from Athens. It's between the current airport and Athens, the town called Paiania. And he had those stables renovated and had an architect design a museum, because at the same time he also started to patronize contemporary artists. And he really wanted to support contemporary Greek art. So he actually really bought whatever paintings he deemed worthy. He also had a very varied taste. And this made the Vores Museum actually having the best collection of contemporary Greek art. And so it's from the 1960s until the 2000s. So the year after that landscape exhibition, Mr. Vores passed away. It passed on to his grandsons, and they wanted to modernize the programming of the museum, and they actually asked Katerina Pizanias, who curated that other exhibition, what should we do, and she suggested a residency. And then the first year they decided to not have an open call, and because I was part of that exhibition, I was sort of, I think, the lucky one to be invited to go there and stay there for a month. And so here you can see these beautiful grounds of the museum, and you can see these old buildings and walls and all these sort of elements that are sort of integrated. And to be honest, I really fell in love with the estate. And so this is pictures of the afternoon I came there for my residency. I came there in a fragile state because I had a dog I really loved, who was 15 and who got sick the weeks leading up to my leaving, and he was actually dying, so we had him put down. The morning I was sort of at 9 o'clock, and at noon I was boarding my plane. So, I mean, it was sort of in a state of shock in that plane towards Greece, and here I came. It was like this paradise. It was lovely. This was the little sub-patio with a studio that was empty, that they thought to use for Mr. Vores because he lived on the grounds. And this was the room. So this was my space and the room. And it looked great. And then part of the residency was to create Greek-Canadian relationships artistically, and also for the visiting artists to respond to the museum's collection. So I didn't have any plans. I mean, there was no marine biology involved. I had a look at that actually, but that was too complicated. So I came with a formal plan. I had read some ideas on folding, and I thought it would be really, really great if I could maybe print on folded shapes. So the first few days I just simply started with folding paper and exploring those forms. I dove right in. I usually do that. And so that's the table I had put up. And so I started to fold paper, and I really arrived at that form as attractive that I wanted to do something with. And I also wanted to do something with a thumbprint. Beforehand I knew that. So I had printed my thumb and then enlarged in Photoshop. So this was sort of what I set out to do. And then you start to sort of think about these things. And I'm still not showing the contemporary collection because I really was sort of fixated by the garden, and I sort of started thinking, you know, this is like a paradise, and you think, what is a paradise? If it's a garden is nature, but it's nature managed by humans. It's a cultural construct. And how can I maybe express the garden? So let's maybe make my first art piece referencing elements I'm finding there. So, for instance, the gate to the museum, there was this motif of griffins and swans. In the garden there was this acanthus flower growing, which is a flower that's often used in architecture, in classical architecture. In columns they have these acanthus leaves as a very well-known classical element, because I did want to reference Greek things in my and Greek concepts too. So when I unfold my foldings, I got this zigzag sort of pattern as a motif, and as you may have seen in my slides on those styrofoam pieces, I really like patterns, so I work with patterns. And I started to sort of reference the flowers, the leaves, elements of the fountains. In the center, pomegranate, citrus fruit, cypress shape, so all these kinds of things. And I thought, well, if I'm so much busy with that, I should make another one, a companion piece on the contemporary collection. And unfortunately, I didn't put a lot of shots of the whole inside of the museum here, but so this is when you're inside in the modern wing, it's sort of a U shape. And one of the pieces in the contemporary collection that really I liked from start and struck me was this one by Yannis Gaitis. He's a painter from the 70s. It was really neat to learn about Greek artists, and I didn't realize before that Greece had for a long time been under a dictatorship. And so there was a level of censorship on which art was kind of, deemed correct. And Mr. Forest had a couple of pieces in the collection that are actually really criticizing that. So there was quite a political element in some pieces, which I didn't reference. But this one I really liked. He was an outsider artist in the 70s who by the end of his life became actually really pretty successful and accepted. He painted these kinds of men in all sorts of forms and combinations, the anthropaki, the little man. And for me this was like, okay, this is the masses, the human masses, the human landscape. It's sort of like, you know, this mass of humanity, and I really loved his noses and eyes. And I also think this is one of the instances where an artist is sort of prescient, because I sort of see digital code in there. I see ones and zeros, but I mean it's from the 70s. So this kind of painting became the cornerstone of my contemporary imagery. And so with that idea of these digital eyes, I started to think about, okay, our human society and about communication. So there were a couple of pieces. Artist Akritakis, who paints a lot of paintings that are all sorts of imaginary icons of languages. So it's also about communication. Sculpture of the Lips I referenced. I thought they also had quite a few pieces with LED lights and electronics. And I mean, 76, it's kind of interesting to have a thing there with little electronics. If you turn this on, there will be some bird song singing from the bird. And the one in the bottom, I simply like the imagery. So all of these influences and a few more, I kind of put together here in a sketch. So it's about the mechanization, electronics, the network, this mass of humanity. And then I got the idea, okay, if I cut these zigzags up and I start to actually interweave those two elements, the garden and the museum, nature and culture. And so I sort of combined the sketch, and I really liked what was happening. You know, sort of these flowers growing out of the lips, these sort of weird things. Anyway, so I transferred my drawings into linoleum, started cutting. This I bought in Athens, and I did bring my lino things with me, because I'm a printmaker. So this is the first proof I pulled, and my little cafe table that I had was my inking table. So all hand printing, but that's the good thing. You can do that with relief. You can print anything you want. This is the proof of the, oh yeah, and then the title. Well, that's okay. And then, of course, ta-da, how would it look if I ink it up, alternating. So yeah, I was getting into it, so working late at night. And using the floor as space with, by the way, gorgeously hand-woven rug from the collection. So I better not soil it. And that was the proof. So the pieces that are up there on the wall, they are the same pieces. So those were the ones I actually printed in Greece. And I was really very happy with this result. However, when I folded this one, I was wondering whether it was a bit too much. And so I quickly made another folded piece that's also here with just one element that you repeat to sort of explore more, okay, what happens with the shadows and a repeated pattern on the folded form. And I thought the Greek eye was a good thing to just use. And later you read on Aristotle, and Aristotle says that, you know, that vision and the eyes is important, so vision is food for the soul. And I think, well, these kinds of things that sound really good for an artist. So another artwork I referenced in the collection were these sculptures. The museum actually also had a pretty nice sculpture garden. And I was hoping Alison would have some photos of that. But these I liked because, yeah, patterns. I also met the artist, Christina Sarandopoulos. She doesn't use her own thumbprints. I guess that this sphere has some marks of the Forest family, the founding grandfather and the 3 grandsons who are now running the museum. So that brings me back to, okay, so I had that thumbprint with me, that big photocopy of my own thumbprint, and I saw these logs in the back of the garden somewhere, and I thought, well, let's see if I can do a woodcut in this piece of Mediterranean pine. So I happened to be able to borrow a sanding machine to really sand it down, and yeah, you know, these growth rings, they're a little bit like the spirals on your thumb. So I thought, well, this is so lovely, let's see if I can just make an imprint of the log. And so that's the imprint I made of the log by using very diluted printing ink. And so if it's very thin and oily, it will soak into the wood, different levels of, you know, thickness of the wood, and it really brought out those rings. And then I made a second version of carving my thumbnail in there, and that's my Dremel station. I had asked them before they had a Dremel on site, so I only brought my bits. So I'm editioning, and that's actually the log that after printing all the editions, I sanded it up, and so it became a bit of a little sculpture, and that was left behind at the museum. I made a couple of proofs of those thumbprints, and, well, you are thirsty, so you drink bottled water, and actually I hate bottled water because of the plastic you throw out. This is my environmental concern speaking. So the thumbprint on the log, my first idea was about the imprint we have as humans on nature. And so that's going on the bottle. And this piece, actually, I made way later. It's actually 6 by 4 feet. I carved it for a steamroller print event in Calgary. But I have a small version of this piece in the exhibition here. It actually references the California drought, the masking of the reservoir with plastic balls, and then the plastic gets into the food chain. So plastic, so it's a whole sort of anti-plastic bottle print. But anyway, back to the thumbprint. You make all these things, and it's interesting. You go to a Greek museum, you have to interact with the collection, you work rather intuitively, and then I reflect on, okay, so what am I really wanting to say with the prints I've made? And you want to come up with a title. So these, I thought, you know, it's okay, it's our imprint on nature, but at the same time it's also about identity. It's the identity of the tree with the growth rings and the way it has grown. And it's my thumbprint, it's also my identity. And I also took some books with me on classical philosophers, and I'm very much interested in Aristotle because he was the original natural history guy. But anyway, Aristotle talks a lot about ousia, and that gave me my title because ousia, I first looked, okay, what is nature in Greek? Well, it's physis, but physis is the physical nature, and ousia can also be translated as nature, but it's the non-physical element. It's being, it's substance, its essence, and I thought, well, that's a perfect title for the thumbprint piece. It took a bit longer for the folded piece to find a good way. So first of all, when I came home, I revisited my idea to do embrace the folded form for this print, and I editioned it not in the monochrome, but with some more color. And I decided I do like it folded after all. And the neat thing is, of course, is if you see it from this angle, you know, you can make the one element disappear. If you put it, you know, flat on a table, you sort of look this way, so you only see the nature segment, and you look from the other angle, and you know, then the image appears of our societal, cultural, overpowering, overpopulating humanity part. So my problem was then, how do you define this sort of clash that we have, that we stress we put up on our environment, but we're actually also part of the environment. And then that's this happy thing, you talk with people, someone says to me, have you read Marx Ecology by John Foster? And in that book, he talks about metabolic rift, which was a term coined by Marx, who apparently had quite an environmental element to his theory, but it's something that wasn't taken along in the political explanations of his theory, where he says that there is a crack or rift caused by the capitalist system between social and natural systems. The rift led to exploitation of the environment and an ecological crisis. He was actually thinking about agriculture at the time of the masses going to the cities to work in the factories. It's too large to explain the depth of it, but I thought metabolic rift, that's exactly what it is, and it's also really nicely expressed by those folded shape of the print. So metabolic rift became the title of this print, and this is the flat version. And I'm nearly to the end of my talk, so I had a nice coincidence that there's the Athens Art Fair happening annually, and this one was at the end of my residency, at the beginning of June, and the Forest Museum had a booth there, and so they said, well, you can put your stuff up, which I thought was awesome. But the nice thing is too that if Canadians see this print, they may say, these guys are cool. But how many people here would know that it's work by Yannis Gaitis that I referenced? And so people don't know. So I like that idea that there's this layer of, this iconography that's in this print that the Canadian audience wouldn't notice. But the people coming to the art fair, they picked it out, which I thought was really, really great. And so also, fortunately, I had some good feedback on that. So this print is here as well, and it's kind of interesting. This has come out a totally different thing. It's more my biology, but at the same time, this is still busy with metabolism. So I think that's sort of a nice connection. And it's also a piece I'm working on now. So the flat print, but can also be constructed in a lab of transparent material, and hopefully next week I'll have an installation up with 24 and LED programmed inside to have sort of a light wave going through the installation. There's leaf material, plant, and the intermediate, so it's this sort of exchange of the carbon dioxide oxygen cycle. So yeah, that's that. And I'm sorry that Alison can't sort of say what she's working on, but so the way that Alison happened to go to Forest is actually, before I left to Greece, I had an exhibition south of Calgary, and she was showing too, and we met, and I was telling I was going to Greece, and she said she was very interested in Greece, and so because of that, she applied for the residency the following year. And she just told me that, she made a lot of sketches and she took a lot of pictures, and there are a couple of photoshopped large transparencies over there, or photos, and those are actually her setups that she's going to work from. To make paintings on, and she said that she had like 12 or 16 concepts that she sort of has lined up to work from. So I hope I can come back again and maybe see something of that. So.
A quick question. Francis Light, where you said you have this installation in when will it be? Where will it be shown?
There's the Downtown Association in Calgary wants to start an inaugural light festival, and they banked the Family Day weekend. It's only up for 4 days, so it's in the downtown in a +15.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a website, I think, Glow Downtown Winter Light Festival. Yeah, any questions? Otherwise, thank you.
A lot of your work as I'm looking through, and when I had an opportunity to look through before, but also reminds me too, I think of fractals.
Yeah.
Matching those kinds of numbers. Is that something that because the way you put it together, almost that kind of sort of consideration as well, or?
Oh, well, I mean, if you sort of engage with nature and patterns in nature, then you inevitably arrive at fractals. You inevitably arrive at, things like the golden section. And I really like that. And I'm sort of realizing there's a lot of hidden mathematical things behind it. And sometimes I try and sort of lift it out. But, and sometimes it's just because those shapes are generated, because they are natural forms, they will happen. Yeah.
Eveline, can I?
Yeah.
Some of your work, especially like some of these prints that you did in Greece, that were referencing specific artists and people that you found there in Greece.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I think that you don't make more overt reference to that, say in the title or something else. And it's interesting to me that you were that you said that, like, when you're referencing Gaitan, Yanis Gaitan, or whoever it is. Gaitis, yes.
Well,
It was very specific, and so you had a public in Greece who recognized him as one of their own, right? And here, of course, that reference is lost on us,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm just surprised about that.
I wondered about, the only way I referenced this by this version here, the black one, I called it Museum Vores iconography. But maybe that's too circumstantial. But I'm sort of wanted to sort of call this version. So of course I have basically 5 versions, because I have this one, the garden one, the connected one, the folded one, and I have the folded one in 2 color streams. So yeah, this is the one that I should really heavily call the Vores Museum, but I thought if I would sort of use, say, Ode to Gaitis or something, I'm sort of leaving out the Akritakis things and the Simosi lips, and those are sort of more vague, they're more symbolic, but then this one, the Antonopoulos sort of thing. So I thought, Museum Vores iconography.
I mean, because they feel like homages to these
Yeah.
artists, right? That you were inspired by in some
Well,
way.
maybe I should adapt the title then more as like homage to Gaitis, or it's in my statement on these pieces, but it's a good thought.
For me, it's also like the iconography. It reminds me of the idea of democracy that is started from Greece and Athens for the first time in the Greek mythology. Like if we go back to that, how the first human rights, or the rights for wanting to select, or having the right to like all living equally together and like building up a democracy. It's like, for me visually, it's really representing that.
That definitely with these masses you could see politically, because I didn't do anything, also because if my work is political, it's political towards the environment, but to sort of clarify, I came to Greece for the landscape exhibition in 2012. I actually came to Greece not for art purposes in 2013, and then the residency was in 2014, and at that time the big political story in Greece was membership at the EU and the financial crisis that, you know, they were defaulting on their payments and they were in debt, and were they leaving or staying in the EU? And with each consecutive year, you could see the poverty, the more shops boarded up in Athens. I mean, Athens is still a great place to visit, but I mean, you really saw and you heard from talking with people that they were really going through dire straits, and people who may have caused this thing or, you know, siphoned off all the money, they were gone. So, you know, normal people, although normal people never pay taxes in Greece, which is one of the problems. And so the refugee crisis was not really yet happening in June 2014. I think it started to become a more serious thing with, you know, waves of people stranding on the shores more towards fall of that year. And then, of course, the year Alison went in 2015, I think by that time the refugee crisis overshadowed the financial crisis of the year before. So I sort of wasn't in Greece when that was happening and haven't been back there since. I also decided to indeed stick to the more formal aspect of being busy with the collection, so being kind of quite insular, at the same time being very interested in delving into philosophical and archaeological kind of history that Greece has. But of course, I mean, for other artists, there would be tons and tons of interesting things to explore. And I did meet with, so the second time I went to the art school in Athens. And of course, Greek artists, I mean, the instructor there, she was teaching printmaking, and I think she was only paid 50% of her wage. But yeah, she was committed and she made do, and she also said that, you know, lots of artists were actually doing quite interesting things, just, you know, self-generated stuff, niche stuff. So in a way it was kind of creative, but very marginal and of course not funded work that they're doing. And that's sort of what I know about that. So that's definitely an angle to sort of, you know, connect with if another Canadian artist is going this year. I don't know who that is. I haven't heard about that. But yeah, that would sort of been not sort of my thing. And, yeah.
Thank you very much. Who's the curator that you mentioned before, the Canadian?
Katerina Pisanias.
Yes, okay, now just to, I think we're going to have her here next
Yes.
month to give a lecture. So if you're not on my mailing list, send me an email, I'll put you on, you'll get all my junk mail, and you'll hear about her.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, she's a very interesting character and person with a lot of knowledge about it.
Well, thank you, everyone. Please stay here for starting the reception. And we're gonna have food and free drinks, and just drinks maybe by donation. And thank you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you.
My parents thought the same thing when I started.